What's going down, D-Gens? Got a couple plays to talk about today, guys. Second video in a week. I'm fucking killing myself over here with these videos. For real, someone get me out of this chair. On a real note, though, adding the preseason game, and it's going to be for tonight's game, so I apologize if nobody gets to see this video ahead of time. I actually got a comment on the last video referring to this one, and it kind of beat me to the punch just looking into the Browns-Eagles game. The Browns +4 is the pick, but a couple hedges I want to put out there. So, number one, why do I like the pick? Well, Eagles and Sirianni still could really care less about the preseason. And obviously, just like most other teams, they are having the joint practices. On that note, the Jets canceled their joint practice for this week. They had the first game, the first day of joint practice, and then didn't make the second joint practice or the third one for that matter. And they're not going to meet up again until they actually have the game, and that again is the Jets with the Buccaneers. I don't know why they did that. Well, I can tell you what he said. Salah said that he felt one practice is enough, two practices was going to get somebody hurt, and he didn't want to do that. So that's what he did, and it sounded like the Jets pretty much manhandled the Buccaneers in that first joint practice, and he thought that they were going to come out, the Buccaneers that is, with a little aggravation and possibly hurt some of the players. So he opted out of it, which, whatever. But it does tell me something that I already, pretty much knew and why we bet it earlier in the week. The Jets are just the better team. Like on paper, in the preseason is probably the best time of year to go off of just strictly your personnel rankings. And by all means, give me the Jets over the Browns personnel-wise all day. So, anyways, that's enough about that pick. Going to today's pick, which is the Browns again. They've been joint practicing. I read as much as I can. Apparently, all the starters are going in the joint practices for each team. The Browns have come out and said Deshaun Watson is not going to play in this game, and they've also said Joshua Dobbs is not playing in this game. So that tells us a couple things. Number one, this game is going to predominantly be Kellen Mond and Dorian Thompson. Now, of those two guys, I've said it before. I have said in the Hall of Fame week, Kellen Mond can go lick an asshole. That guy is just not an NFL caliber player, in my opinion, and that's probably why he's playing so much preseason time and why he's really, truly on the bubble to make this team. I am thinking, and I have a very strong suspicion, that the reason they're specifically playing just these two guys is to see who's going to actually be on this team, assuming that they carry three active quarterbacks. Who is going to make the team, who is going to not make it or be a practice squad guy. And I have a stronger feeling that Dorian Thompson is the one that's going to make this team. Now, we've only seen the guy play once, really, which was in the Hall of Fame game. I don't remember seeing him much at all in the game last week, but we should get a pretty heavy dose of him. The depth chart that the Browns released have Kellen Mond as the third stringer, which would be the starter for this game, and then Dorian Thompson in the second half, which could really work to our advantage here because it's going to have Dorian Thompson, which, again, in my opinion, is a better quarterback, playing against the weaker defense. Kellen Mond is really going to just try to keep everything in front of him. He's going to do a bunch of little 3 to 5 yard checkdowns and maybe try a deep pass or two that gets intercepted or deflected or is like way the hell out of a damn building. Either way, I could see the Eagles coming out and getting a lead and playing really well in the first half, and then the second half not doing so great. So that's kind of how I expect this to go, and I do expect that Dorian Thompson is going to hopefully get the win and just make it a sweat-free day for us in that second half. But give me the +4 because I do think if they lose, it's decided by a field goal, and it's going to come down to it, especially with the Eagles not putting a whole lot of emphasis on, lighting up the scoreboard in preseason. Now, Sirianni has not said officially that the starters are not playing, but just going off of what we saw last year with him and just off of the fact that they've had a lot of joint practices, I am not expecting to see any of the starters for the Eagles in this game. It is most likely going to be all of the backups. The best in my opinion, for the Eagles, or the biggest threat to us here is probably Ian McKee, and he is currently listed as the third stringer, which would be the second guy to come in this. But the Eagles are most likely having a three-man rotation, meaning that he's probably going to get 1 to 2 quarters of game time, and it should be good for us if he is either the starter or the second guy in, where he's not going to be there to close out the game, and that it should be when Dorian Thompson is doing his work. So a lot of different guys rotating in there, and again, I think the Eagles are just going to use this preseason game the way that they've used all the other preseason games, and it's strictly to evaluate talent, not really try to get the win or do a whole lot of like adjustments with play calling and stuff like that. So that's the biggest reason. On top of that, though, if you look at the schedules and just go back and kind of see when these teams have played, the Browns have actually played both of their preseason games, including the Hall of Fame game that is, excuse me, at home. They really have not had to travel. The Eagles last week traveled to Baltimore, and mind you, it's obviously not like cross country or anything from Philly to Baltimore, but now they're going to come off of a short week of rest. They just played Saturday. They've had 3 joint practices, 2 of which I'm sure were very, very physical. That really just ended yesterday. So they played Saturday, most likely got home Sunday or late Saturday night. They were practicing, I believe, is Monday, Tuesday, as again what I'm assuming are very physical joint practices. Wednesday is probably a walkthrough, even though it was a joint practice, and then today is actual game day. So that team has not had a whole lot of rest. They've been doing a whole lot of activities and just beating the hell out of each other with, again, not a whole lot of downtime going back to Saturday. So I do think that the rest advantage is on the Browns team here, even though they've had to come into Philly. They've already been there for a few days. This isn't like, oh my God, they just got here this morning. They've been there. They played Friday, so they do have that one additional day of rest off. And then lastly, the Eagles played the Ravens, and if anything, it seemed like maybe they were actually trying in that game, not necessarily going above and beyond to get the win or anything, but just to prove a point that they were at least competitive with, what we all claim to be the best preseason team in the NFL, which is the Ravens. So I wouldn't be surprised if the intensity kind of ratchets down just a little bit in this game, and a lot of the Eagles team, staff, everything has kind of seen what they need to see more in the joint practices and are not so focused on the game itself. So, again, all of these things here are pointing towards the Browns. I would not hate taking the Eagles for the first half for exactly what I was saying. If it is Kellen Mond, the way that they put down on paper, it's supposed to be, I can really see the Eagles getting out to like a 10-0 lead here in the first half, or like a 14-3, something like that, and kind of putting it on Dorian Thompson to come back in the second half. So if you like the Eagles, I would play them the first half. I'm going to put just a little bit of a sprinkle in the first half, with the Browns being my full game pick. And then throughout that first half, you can also look to get your spot to hedge backwards. So if at some point the Browns do take a lead, or in the second half, when we're expecting them to take a lead, hey, maybe at some point you can get the Eagles plus the 3. I'm not touching the Eagles again, plus, outside of the little sprinkle I'm doing on the first half, unless I can get them plus the points, and specifically I'm trying to get plus 3 or better. Like I said, I think one way or the other, this game comes down to a field goal game. So that's the pick for today. Now, there is one more pick that I have for you guys, and this is for week 1 of the NFL season. Now, let me tell you this. Obviously, we're still ahead of schedule here quite a bit as far as NFL is concerned. We have, 2-3 more weeks before the actual games start. But I really, really love the Steelers in week 1. I have officially gotten the Giants plus 3 in my pocket. That's one that we talked about before earlier in the summer, but I don't think we ever actually confirmed that play. I can confirm now. The money's in. I have the ticket. Giants plus 3 is a pick. But the Steelers plus 3 is also a pick. I really, really love this, just the way everything is breaking for this team. So as far as the positive for the Steelers, a couple things. Number one, the team is just starting to come together a little bit better. I'm assuming it's because it's Pickett's second year. Tomlin is really vesting the offense into Kenny Pickett and making sure that he's getting the maximum out of his quarterback. You also have guys like a Najee Harris, who's he's a volume play, but when you have Jaylen Warren behind him, Jaylen Warren is going to be a change of pace kind of guy. And if you've seen him play, whether it's a preseason or last season, the guy has some juice to him. He has some wiggle. He can definitely do things that Najee Harris can't do. So while they may be beating the hell out of the offensive or the defensive line with Najee Harris, when Jaylen Warren comes in, he is going to inject some explosiveness into this team. George Pickens is looking good. Obviously, he scored the touchdown last week. But with him and Pickett together, another year under their belt, the guy's looking even better. He can make spectacular catches, move the ball. You guys probably already know this about the Steelers team if you've been paying attention to them at all. Mike Tomlin, though, on an angle that I mentioned earlier in the offseason, but I haven't really harped on it yet, these coaches that really, really try in the offseason, or the preseason, I should say, and try to get the wins and play with an intensity because they're trying to establish that for their team, typically do really well the first week of the season. So think of John Harbaugh and the Ravens. Yes, they have an amazing preseason record, but what a lot of people don't talk about is the first week record. I don't have it off the top of my head, but the guy is something like 8-1 or 7-1 in week one games, and it's not even close. If you go back and look at the last 4 or 5 years, consistently in week one, the Ravens are not just winning, they're putting an ass whipping on whoever they play in week one. And I personally attribute that to this team that has been playing at a higher intensity, a regular season level of intensity throughout the entire preseason, and the coach who's really trying to make the adjustments, getting himself into game shape, versus teams who may not really give a shit, who are just kind of going through the motions. They're more concerned with, hey, what players are we keeping and cutting? And then in week one, they're then going to try to make all their adjustments. So Mike Tomlin is another coach, again, in the form of John Harbaugh, that he really, really puts an emphasis on preseason. He's 6-1, and 6-1 against the spread in that case over these last 2 years. Guy puts a lot of emphasis on this. The team's coming together better. The defense looks great. T.J. Watt is healthy, and we know what that defense can do when T.J. Watt is playing great. It's going to be an amazing defense, and that leads me to my next point. For all of the accolades that people are giving to Brock Purdy, he only played one really good, or I should say beat one really good defense last year, and that was the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs. Leading up to that game, he had not played a top 10 defense at all. So the guy did good. He had good numbers. He got the team where they needed to be, got him in the playoffs. Great. But the fact that he had not really been tested doesn't get talked about a whole lot. Now, they obviously did get tested in the Eagles matchup that was, again, in the playoffs, but he really didn't get to play a whole lot of that game, or at least he didn't get to play a lot of that game healthy. They ended up losing that game in just a weird shit of a game, right? Like all of their injuries, and they ended up having to try to throw left-handed and all the other crap. Just not a good outcome, but I'm even throwing that one out the window because of the weird circumstances. In the Cowboys game, though, they didn't look good. It was a very low-scoring game. Just defense was putting a lot of pressure on him. The Cowboys' defense is really what kept them even in that game. And now, after an entire offseason where he has not been starting, he's still dealing with a thumb injury. Trey Lance looks like shit, and the reason that he's even getting this much playing time, and we're not talking about Purdy, is because Purdy's not even really participating in the preseason. You're going to throw him in there week one against what's expected to be a top 10 defense with a solid offense. It's going to be a bad showing for Brock Purdy. I'm putting that out there right now, putting the cards on the table, laying the flag down. I have a feeling that's going to be a bad week for Brock Purdy, assuming that he is the starter. And if he's not the starter, it's going to be an even worse week for someone like Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold can make some throws. He's okay. He's, competent as at least a backup level quarterback. He's not competent enough to put on a show against the Steelers. Lastly, when the 49ers are on defense, they are also expected to be a top 10 defense. The problem is Nick Bosa has not been in training camp. He's not signed his deal yet. So you have a holdout, which is one of your best defensive players. The guy who you're expecting to put pressure on a Kenny Pickett, make him make those bad throws, get him out of his comfort zone, is not there. Now, yes, he should eventually be with the team, But if he does have any sort of holdout, it's going to be week one, possibly week two. And there's not really a lot of coverage about that right now. But if that team does not have Bosa, that defense looks a lot different. They lost a lot of their secondary pieces in the offseason, and they're really dependent on that defensive line to get pressure, especially on a younger quarterback like a Kenny Pickett. Make him make mistakes, make him make bad throws, make him make quick reads. And if Bosa is not there, that's a problem. So you have a quarter or a team and a head coach that have been really, really busting their ass in the preseason versus another coach who has Kyle Shanahan's great, don't get me wrong, but he's trying to get this damn lineup right. He's trying to make sure he has a quarterback for week one and who he wants to put in there. Secondly, you have a guy who has, again, 2 years now with Kenny Pickett, offense coming together. Everybody knows their position. Everybody knows their role. They're just kind of fine tuning everything versus a team who is still trying to decide who's going to be the quarterback, what defensive line is showing up, and who's going to be the alpha dog in that offense when there's so many mouths to feed and a quarterback that may not be able to do much more than hand off the ball. And then lastly, you have defenses that are both supposed to be very staunch defenses. And again, one of them has had a lot of turnover and has possibly going to be missing their number one defensive lineman due to a holdout versus the other defense is not dealing with any of those issues. Is actually getting their best player back and healthy compared to last year. He was playing through a couple bumps and bruises, and I believe it was like a torn pec or something like that. But a pretty significant injury that kept him out about half the season. So a lot of different things pointing in the direction of the Steelers. So give me the Steelers plus the 3 points. I want to even lay a sprinkle on the money line at the plus 133. Love that pick for week one. The next video next week, we will go over some picks for obviously preseason week three. I can tell you right now, one of my favorite plays is going to be another under for the preseason. I'm sorry, it's preseason week four technically, and that's going to be the Broncos and Rams game where we have Sean Payton and McVay playing against each other with both of them not giving any damns about the preseason whatsoever. That's going to be the under for sure next week. Once we have a line out, we'll talk more about it. But then we're also going to recap week one picks, what we have on the table, what we already have, and why it's probably the only week I'm going to have more than 5 plays for that particular week. I think I'm up to about 8 different plays that I have in the books right now for week one. Most of the weeks, guys, it's going to be 5 at the very, very top, and probably more like 3. So keep that in mind. And then at some point, whether it's next video or the one after, we'll talk about some handicapping tips, some things with process, and just more about how to, get yourself ready, how to not make beginner mistakes, all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about that later. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope y'all listen to this. Please let me know below if you like the picks, if you agree with it, you think I'm stupid, whatever it is, or if there is a pick that you like out there that we have not talked about. Thank you again. See y'all soon, and I really appreciate the support.